Hi, welcome to One on the Page. I'm Scott. I'm thinking of doing something new. I've done things in the past like the 5 year battles for Agatha Christie and Stephen King. I've gone over different genres that I hadn't before, such as romance, which, of course, anybody who watches my vlogs recently know that I've done that quite a few times. But I wanted to start reading something that I haven't really read before. But because I tend to be a jack of all trades when it comes to genres, I read everything, or at least I thought would read everything. But when I was thinking of something else to try, a genre that I haven't tried before, it's like, well, I've done that one, I've done that one. I don't know what to do. But I thought, well, I read horror, and I used to read quite a bit of horror, but I don't read as much as I used to. And also, there are horror genres that I don't read or haven't read. And I was looking them up, and I came across extreme horror, which I have never read before, but I thought, well, that's something I could try. So I was like, that sounds pretty cool. I mean, horror that's basically what, at the X Games or skateboarding, surfing. So I'm just going to look up what extreme horror is. Oh, that is not what I was expecting. Um, I may have made a mistake. Okay, so extreme horror. I I said I never read it. Technically, I guess because I did read a book that was often seen as extreme horror, the Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. I read that a long time ago. I do not remember much about it, but I did read it. As far as I know, that is my only experience with extreme horror. So what I decided to do was I was going to go and pick five of the most known, highest ranking, controversial uh, extreme horror books. I didn't do that. I did it once. I picked one book. Somebody had a list of like the 10 best extreme horror books, and I got Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. And then I went into Kindle Unlimited. I went to extreme horror to search for that, ranked by star ranking, and I picked four books that were some of the more popular books. Now, how they were scored, I don't know. Was it by people who are, extreme horror junkies who know everything about extreme horror? I don't know. So, other than Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison, which I have started, I'm like 10% of the way in, I believe. It's gross, but it's not anything that I find too extreme. And I think I'm fairly normal on this squeamish level. I'm like the extreme horror equivalent of, uh, yeah, what, a 2000 on the Scoville? I could take that. Hmm. I imagine that they're going to get to like a million on these, but I don't know. I assume that I'm not going to respond very well to that. We shall see. I also chose Widow by Ash Ericmore, The Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet, Brother by Ania Ahlborn, and I apologize if I mispronounce the name, and Girlflesh by Leitz. Don't know anything about these books. The only requirements that I put, the only restrictions that I put on myself is I was going to choose books from one certain author, and that's simply because I've seen that author has had some interactions with book reviewers online, and I'm not gonna bother with that. If somebody can't take criticism, then you know my novice ass doesn't need to be going into a book and dealing with that. So, if you are not an extreme horror fan, this may not be the video for you. I'm going to talk about the books, but I will try to be as PG as I can while still letting you know what the books are about. I will be discussing things that may be a trigger for some people. I will not get graphic, but I will discuss the plot and some of the events in the books. If you are an extreme horror fan, just realize that I'm a novice, haven't read extreme horror before, except for that one Jack Ketchum book, and I will probably get things wrong. I may have opinions that you think are dumb. You may have that feeling even if you're not an extreme horror fan. So, uh, I'm going to read these books. I don't know how long it will take. They're almost all of them are fairly short. I think at least four of them are around the 200-page mark, and I think one of them's a little bit longer. But I also, if I am stymied by something I'm reading, I will go to read something else. So I assume that I can finish these in a week, but I may not be able to finish them for the whole month. As you can see, Christmas tree is up. You saw the little tour I took around the house. It's not Christmas time yet. It's the beginning of November, which is when I really put Christmas up. So yeah, this is starting around the 1st of November. I will post it pretty quickly after I'm done with it, so you'll see how long it took me to read the book. Let's get started on this journey. It is day 2 or 3, because I didn't really have a definitive starting date for this, but I have read 2 extreme horror novels already, and I have started on my third. The first one I read, in my order in picking these, as far as which ones to read, was very simple. I went from shortest to longest. So the first one is Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. And I'm going to have a warning up here, but just in case you didn't see that warning, some of the conversation I'm going to talk about is going to be very graphic and could be triggering. So this is your warning for that now. Okay, I'm going to start talking about it now. Uh, and for extreme horror, I'm also like, I'm all damaged up now because you can't see it. You can see them. That one has been outside for 6 weeks, escaped through a window, and I just got him back in today. He wasn't happy about it, and of course, now that he's in, he's been up all over me and headbutting me and digging his claws into my chest. But before, he damaged me quite a bit. Dead Inside is about a security guard at a hospital. Really, the main reason he works at the hospital is because he has access to the morgue. In the morgue, there are dead people, specifically dead girls. He's attracted to dead girls, doesn't really care for the living that much. At the hospital is also a doctor named Heather, and she is a cannibal. She likes to eat dead babies. He finds her doing this one day, and they start a strange kind of relationship. She's living, obviously, so he's not overly attracted to her. But I was about halfway through this book, and yes, he likes to sleep with dead girls, she likes to eat dead babies, pretty screwed up stuff. But honestly, the descriptions were not very graphic at all. Not that I particularly wanted descriptions of each of those types of situation, but it it wasn't anything that bothered me particularly. And I was like going, okay, I mean, yeah, it's gross to think about, but then there comes, well, several scenes in the latter half of the novel that are definitely warrant the graphic content warning that you get with these types of books. I will say that I wasn't sure how I would feel about these types of books. One thing that I'm having a trouble with, not just these books, but really any horror, is that generally a lot of horror books, movies, etc., try to go for the gore or the scare. And horror itself is when you feel a connection to the characters so that you actually do feel horror, and it's like, ooh, and instead of like, oh, that's a gross way to die. Anyway, what's the next one? Now, this is written from the point of view of the security guard. He is like the biggest edge lord, except of course that he actually does some really screwed up stuff. And Heather is very much a screwed up person, but she's also trying to get a connection. You still there, buddy? Okay. And she sees him as somebody who is as screwed up as she is, sees that connection, tries to connect with him, and of course he's like, well, you're not dead, so I don't really like you. I kind of knew where the book was going, and it did get there. Not quite the same way I was expecting it to. He's going to jump up here, isn't he? No, he's not. Okay, good. But it did get there in a very graphic scene. I did not care for the main character at all. Of course, I'd be a little bit worried if I did care for him, but I understood him a little, and I understood Heather also a little. Obviously, don't understand the actions that they do, and it's in a strange way, the novel is almost a little bit sweet about people trying to connect with other people while being true to themselves. Now, it obviously takes a lot of left turns in that, and there's some coincidence in it that I don't care for. I am not. Hey, everybody, it's Ron. I am not going to rank the books yet. I'm going to wait till after I have read all of the books, but I will say I'm going to have to put you down here, buddy. There you go. I will say that my ranking for this one has gone up a little bit just because of how it is compared to the second novel I read. Now, the second novel I read was Widow, and I keep screwing this name up because it makes more sense as the way I usually say it, but the name is Ash Ericmore. I keep saying Eric Ashmore, which it makes more sense to me, but obviously Ash Ericmore is the name. So, Widow is a little bit hard to describe. I will because there are a lot of characters in it, and it's when I first started reading it, just taking out the horror element itself, I got kind of like a shortcuts uh, kind of thing, or a Magnolia, where all these different people in their different arcs all end up somehow coming together. What it does, obviously, in a much different way than those movies did. But somebody is taking men and performing surgery on them. One of the first persons that we meet is Jason. He wakes up and discovers that an arm and a leg on the same side have been cut off. And he soon meets somebody with no arms and with sewn lips. And then he meets somebody else who is just a torso and head. So a lot of it is the mystery of how did this happen to them. I will say that it's not a very big mystery. I got it pretty quickly. I There were some things about it that I thought were going to be, but were not. Not because I feel like the author fooled me, but because the author gave like these red herrings, and then these red herrings just turned out to be a part of a story with no other purpose other to be a plot point from this to that. So I enjoyed some of the characters more in here than I did in Dead Inside. Dead Inside really only two characters. There are some other either inconsequential characters or some consequential characters that just play a very, very small part in it. But in Widow, there are many, many characters, and some of them I like more than the other. In the fact that in an extreme horror novel, that they get me to like some of the characters, even if some of the characters end up being a little bit different than I think they are at the beginning, and that's a sign of good writing. What is not a sign of good writing is how this book was edited. I read this on Kindle. I don't know if a physical book version is different, but the editing in this is ghastly. It's horrible. At one point, there's supposed to be the word quiet, and it's spelled as quite. And there are a horrible sentence, and at one point there's commas missing all over the place. It's I'm not going to say it was written poorly. I will say it was edited very poorly. If you are a writer looking for an editor to just kind of go over your material and give it a little bit of shine, or at least point out grammatical mistakes, hey, talk to me. I'm pretty good at that. I'm much better at pointing out mistakes than I am seeing them in my own work. But yeah, the editing on this was horrible, and it was pissing me off because there was so much of it. Also, I'm doing the extreme horror genre. This wasn't extreme. I mean, there were some very bad acts. Obviously, people are getting limbs cut off. There's physical assault. There is murder. And I was about to say, not really premeditated, but oh, well, okay. There are a few murders, but none of it is very graphic. Not that I'm complaining about it, but again, I am doing this on the extreme horror genre, and I don't really feel that this was extreme horror. I have read mainstream horror novels that were more graphic than this. I felt a little disappointed. I think that there is a good novel in here. I just think it needs to be edited, and it needs, honestly, I think it needs to be expanded a bit because it basically comes across as we need to do these horrible things to people, but not really describe them. So we're going to do these horrible things. And I'm like, why are you doing these horrible things? It's like, I get a hint, but I need a little bit more to that. So this one really is a disappointment to me. Now, I won't go into the third book that I read because I haven't finished it yet, but it is Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. And I will tell you right now, I think I'm 25% of the way through it. These are all fairly short books, at least these first three. I think the first four. That I'm basically about halfway through. I've read two and a quarter books so far. Uh, One of them I almost feel bad about saying because I don't really feel it was an extreme horror book. It calls itself an extreme horror book. It has a graphic content warning at the beginning. I just don't think Widow counts as extreme horror. So that is it for now. I will come back and talk to you after I finish Clown Hunt, which I get the feeling because I've already seen part of it. I think this may be, at least so far, the most extreme horror graphic content that I'm going to be facing. I have finished book 3 of the extreme horror Gaza horror. I finished book 3 of the extreme horror books that I am reading. I think that after the disappointment of Widow, which was not graphic at all. Honestly, a little bit boring when you're going to a book expecting it to be extreme horror. I say this as somebody who's a little bit squeamish. I mean, not really reading so much, but like if I were to see this stuff on a screen, yeah, I'd probably be pretty squeamish. But book 3, Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet, I believe that's how you pronounce it, is probably the most extreme graphic of the 3. There, I will say that I still think Dead Inside has the most graphic scene, but it only has two scenes that I really feel like are, oh yeah, that's extreme horror. Whereas this one has multiple scenes. It definitely goes for the graphic. Uh, if you care about the stuff, there is some sex, but I will say the sex itself, I don't particularly look on as graphic. But it is a clown hunt. It is hunting clowns. It's not clowns doing the hunting for reasons that are gone into in the novel. People are hunting clowns. By clowns, that means people who are dressed like clowns or juggalos or happen to be with people who are dressed like clowns, which that's a problem that I have with the novel when you get deeper into the novel and you see the reason that this clown hunt is going on. I don't think that works. But I will say what does work is that, especially with at least two characters, and to some degree with minor characters, I, to some degree with minor characters, you become invested in the characters. I would say for through the first probably 90, 100 pages, a lot of it is just investing in characters. What happens about 90 to 100 pages in, the clown hunt starts. I think it starts to go off track a little bit there. Not because of the graphic nature of what's happening, but because of logic failures, I think. Or not much failures, but I think that this book would benefit from addition. This needs more pages. This needs more information on the people who are doing this and why they're doing this. I feel like, particularly at the end, I just got an info dump and the info didn't make sense to me. There's, as I said, there's a specific reason this is happening. And I don't agree with that reason because it's really hard to explain without spoiling stuff. But when you consider the prologue, what happens in the prologue, and then what happens in the clown hunt, and then you learn about the history, it's like that doesn't make sense. And also, the explanations that people give don't make sense, particularly for what they're saying. And okay, people can be crazy, and their explanation doesn't need to be much, but I still felt like I needed to see how their crazy mind got there, and I don't see it. And again, I really can't explain because there are a lot of players in here. Through the first half of the book, we're almost solely looking through the eyes of two people. And then when the clown hunt starts, we're looking through a lot of different eyes and getting hit with a lot of different characters. And I needed more. I will also say a little bit like Widow, there are some grammatical errors in this. As she points out in her afterward, this is not the apparently the first edition of this, and that the first edition had more errors. And when I say there are some, I mean very little, at least that I saw. Whereas with Widow, I saw them pretty much every page, at least. I will say that my rating that I was thinking giving this book in the first half of the novel is different than the rating I gave it because that second half just doesn't work as well as the first half. And I will also point out, if you're watching this, you've already received the graphic uh, information thing there. I will say I think the first book, Dead Inside, has a more graphic scene, but this one has more graphic scenes as in quantity, and has children in it. And if they thought of children being killed bothers you, this one is not going to be the one for you. I will say that some of the children I didn't have a problem with. I mean, obviously, I have a problem with all children dying, but within the scope of the novel, it makes sense. And some of the other ones, I'm like, no, you just included that because it's an extreme horror book and you decided to do this. And there was another decision. It's like, oh, you did that for extreme horror, but I'm like, I wasn't bothered by that one so much. But I will say that one scene, which is probably the most graphic in this book, in particular, made me have issues with the ending of the novel and the explanation of why people did things. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. That happened made sense to me for that situation at the time. But at the end of the novel, that explanation doesn't make sense for why that happened. And I don't really know how much more to explain that for you without giving it away. So, as I said, I'm not going to rate these until I'm done with all five. I will definitely just say Dead Inside and Clown Hunt are far superior books to Widow. And the first half of Clown Hunt is the best I've read so far in this extreme horror. Now I'm going to be moving on to either Brother or Girl Flesh. I think it's Girl Flesh because I'm going by shortest to longest, and I think Brother is the longest. I finished Girl Flesh by May Leitz. I read the first three books of this extreme horror challenge pretty quickly. The first two I think I read in the space of 3 or 4 days, and I do probably the first three books in the space of a week or so. And ever since then, I've been trying to read Girl Flesh because it's just been a slog. Get it out of the way right now. There is no extreme horror in here. There is like one scene of violence. I don't think it's graphic violence. I don't think it's anything beyond what I see in these books here by Stephen King or your mainstream horror author. Uh, no graphic sex or anything. Not that I feel there needs to be graphic sex, but there's no extreme violence, no extreme sex. Why is this extreme horror? Also, cardinal sin of writing. You're telling me, you're not showing me. You have this blabbing, supposedly an author who can't get to the fucking point. She is just talking about her life and her mother and her husband. And we get told about her husband, but we don't really see her husband until well into the novel. We're told that she has formed this deep connection with this other woman that she meets. They've both been kidnapped. Why were they kidnapped? Well, we're not really told that. I thought that it was some major plot. I was formulating, okay, this is what happened. No, that's not what happened. I'm not really sure what happened. They were kidnapped by serial killers. And are the serial killers working with somebody else? Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't really get into that either. And yeah, so anyways, this author, the main character is an author, apparently a famous author, but she just writes stuff online. Which I don't want to be dogging anybody, but really, how famous are you if you're just somebody who writes online content? Now, if If you tell me this is like a YouTube star, okay, sure, but I mean, published novelists aren't that famous. You get past like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, 98% of novelists, even if people read their books, aren't gonna recognize them. So I mean, I know it could just me being too old too. I know the online world is a little more prevalent now, but I just don't see an online writer being that famous and very full of herself. And apparently, she develops a connection with Caroline over the space of a night, part of which they're trying to save their own asses too. How did they form this connection? I don't know. They just did. Just take that and believe it for some reason. Um, this is just a. I thought that Widow was bad. This book makes me have to re-examine Widow and go, well, no, Widow was mediocre. There were some good things in Widow, not very many, but there were some. This was just the ramblings of an egomaniac who thinks she's special, but also thinks nobody understands her. She's just a commodity, but darn, she's so pretty. Oh, this was just. I could see because this is apparently supposed to be some type of feminist book, which I think can be done well with this plot line. I just don't think that it is. It requires, I was going to say a more deft touch, but it just requires a touch. This is just stumbling around in the dark, just awful, awful writing. This one was, I believe, like 250 pages or so. It, the three previous books before this, I believe I said that they could use some more space to let us know the characters more, to actually make us feel the horror. This book should have been a short story because if you're going to chip away at it and cut off all the stuff that doesn't need to be there until you see the sculpture that's in it, there's very little story that's actually in here. Everything, it's just shouting with a placard, basically. Badly misspelled, poorly written. I don't know. It's just bad, man. Bad. I'm moving on to Brother. I am hoping that it's better, but look how long this took me to read this. I didn't have a beard back then. And it's not like my hair grows that quickly. It makes me seem anti-feminist. I'm not. This just doesn't tell the story well. And that woman needs more serial killers after her. Caroline, the other woman in here, she's a little bit annoying. Just because she's not a fully fleshed character, a fully girl fleshed character. She she just there every once in a while to pop up and say the same things. Why? Don't really know. And then to be her connection and I just don't understand the connection. I'm just going to end up bitching about this more. Apparently, this author has another book which is very extreme. I've heard. I don't plan on reading it simply because this book by her does not make me want to read anything else of hers. If you have read that book, which I can't think of the name of right now, for some reason I think it has to do with bodily fluids, but I could be wrong. If you've read that and you think it's better than Girl Flesh, let me know. If you think it's on par with Girl Flesh, and even if you like Girl Flesh, that's enough for me to know I'm not gonna like it. So I'm moving on to Brother now. I'm 15% of the way into that, and I just started 2 days ago. So it's at least more enjoyable than Girl Flesh so far. Although I don't know if it does it in the physical book too, but the Kindle version, it's got this weird font thing that it's got going on with flashback chapters, which I don't like. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. Got one more book, and then I'm done with extreme horror, unless I decide to read another one, but it's not going to be by Leitz. I have finished the fifth extreme horror book, Brother by Ania Ahlborn. I'm done with extreme horror forever. Who knows? Possibly. I will say at the beginning of this, when I first started it, as I've said, I've read the first three books pretty quickly, like within the space of a week, I believe. And two of those books were pretty good. The other books, not so much. Brother is about basically a family of serial killers, uh, mother, father, two sons, different number of daughters, and basically they find young women who are not necessarily going to be missed, and they kill them, and they have their reasons for killing them. I mean, not just only for the sake of the kill. They have other purposes, which they get into in the novel, so I won't spoil it. I will say that this book is probably the second least extreme book. I think Girl Flesh takes the cake for the least extreme book. I think Brother takes the cake because there's so much that could have been done extreme, and I don't think that everything has to be extreme book, but this is an extreme horror video. These are five books that I was going to read that they were going to be in a genre that I generally don't read. So I was kind of looking for extreme horror, and I feel I got it maybe like in 2.5 books. There was so much that could have been done with this novel. Again, I'm not looking for it, but since I'm reading extreme horror, I'm kind of looking for it. There was This could have been the most extreme of the books, and it was not at all. It was interesting for a while, but honestly, a lot of it deals with Michael, the younger son. I believe he's 20. About He has a birthday in the book, and I think he turns 20 on the birthday. And he participates in the family, let's say, business, but he isn't really fond of it. He does it more as a familial obligation than any real desire to. He does not he does not kill the girls, but he does get rid of the bodies. And basically, he meets a girl, and he thinks about one, wouldn't really be able to explain what his life is to her, and also maybe about possibly getting out of the life. And it takes some turns that I believe are supposed to be surprising and shocking, but I feel like you kind of see them coming right away. And I quite honestly just got exasperated with the main character, Michael, because the book basically relied on him being really dumb. And yet also relied him on being able to make some decisions that aren't necessarily smart, but maybe take some cunning, which he doesn't have. And I also think that there's a lot to the book that could have been explained. The parents, like we learn a little bit about, and I forget her name, but Mama. We learn a little bit about her backstory. We don't really learn a lot about the father's backstory, except nobody calls him dad. They just call him by his first name, which I have forgotten that also. But you got Michael Rebel or Ray, the older brother, who basically bullies the crap out of Michael. And yeah, it wasn't the worst of the books, but I don't think it was very good. I read 24 books in November, and I rank them for the end of month thing. The books 24, 23, and 22 are three of these extreme horror books. Also, books 7 and 6 are. So, two books ranked pretty high, but three were awful. So, I want to go into two things right now. I want to go into what I would rank these books as far as a book. Book number 5, probably not a surprise, is Girlflesh. Just not anything extreme horror. So if you're going into it for that, no. Character work is horrible. I wish somebody had taken care of the main character like right away so I wouldn't have to listen to her prattling. So much telling and not showing. And yeah, just show me what's happening. All of it's just showing. I'm hearing so much about her relationship with her husband, and I don't see any of it. It's just I get her side of it, and I don't trust her. So yeah, I thought this is possibly going to be whenever I rank my 20 worst books of the year, it's probably going to be on that list. So yeah, it is awful. I watched. Book number, well, 4 for extreme horror. Book number 23 is Brother. So yeah, the two last extreme horror books I read are the two worst books of the month. Again, not a lot of extreme horror. Story didn't make a lot of sense. Character work didn't make a lot of sense. Motivations, not a lot of sense. There. This was the longest book. I'm gonna put you down, watch. This was the longest book of the 5, and there's a lot in it, but there's so much more that could have been explained. Like I still don't get exactly when they started killing people. I get why, sort of, but the explanation for why this started, I still don't buy. And a lot of motivations here. Really, the only person's motivations who I really understand are Ray's. And Ray's motivations, everybody should have seen right away, including the characters in the book. That anybody was surprised by what Ray did is just mind-boggling. So that was the fourth worst. The third was Widow by Eric Ashmore. I thought this was pretty bad. It is pretty bad because it is the third worst book of the month, but I think a little bit more of it after reading Girl Flesh and Brother. It again, not really extreme. Not a lot of character work, but it kept me interested at least through the beginning of it. And I did understand motivations. I just don't think the character work was very good. Book number two is Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. I'm sorry, I forgot the name for a moment. Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. It started the best of any of the books. And I just think that when the actual Clown Hunt started, it just lost some traction. And again, motivation. I kind of understand the motivation of some of the characters in it, but the overall arcing motivation, I don't understand, was not explained well. It was so close to being like pretty close to being the best book of the month. It, probably right up there with the first half of the novel. And it lost it at the end. Just disappointing because of how good it was at first. Number one is Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. It, I think, started slower than Clown Hunt, but it built up, and its climax was pretty much a climax. It's like, oh, we have been building up to this, and you could have some quibbles about the ending. It's like, well, what happened next? I mean, you can kind of fill that in your head. I think if you can fill it in your head, you don't really need the author to tell you it. So those are the five books ranked in order of how good they were. The other thing is, how extreme were they? Book number five, Girl Flesh. There is one short scene, I mean really short, and I don't think I would even classify it as extreme horror. Somebody gets shot in a somewhat graphic way, but it's no worse than anything I've seen in most of the horror novels that I've read in the past. It's not graphic at all. There's no real sex in there. It is not an extreme horror novel, according to my point of view. Again, I don't have a lot of experience. There may be people who read extreme horror novels all the time and they think it is. Okay, you're the expert, not me, but I don't see it. Book number four is Brother. And disappointing because I was looking to read extreme horror novels, and this one was like, oh man, this is gonna be bad. I need to make sure I don't read this at dinner. Uh, might need to be near a bathroom in case I have to throw up or something. No, just lost opportunities. There was plenty of chances to make it extreme. It was not. Most disappointing book as far as the extreme horror aspect. And again, I have to put the caveat, I'm not looking for it to be extreme as far as my reading experience, but as part of my extreme horror video experience, like there were a lot of opportunities, not only violence, but sex, that And there wasn't. And if you read it, you will understand what I'm saying about the sex part. It just wasn't there. Book number 3 is Widow, PG-13, maybe a little R-rated. I mean, I'm sure if they filmed this, you would see an R rating for that, but the scenes were not that graphic considering what was being done in those scenes. I felt, I'm sounding like a real sicko here. I felt there could have been a lot more description of what was happening. And I was just like, there was more graphic violence in somebody just beating somebody up in this book than there were in mutilation scenes. So, yeah, I will say, well, I'll get it. Book number 2 was Dead Inside. Was it? Yes. I think Dead Inside has probably the 2 most graphic scenes in it, but they're essentially the only real graphic scenes in there. There is other stuff that's talked about and done in the book, but it's not done graphically. These 2 scenes are very graphic. And the only real sex, graphic sex, that is in any of these novels. There's something in Clown Hunt, but it's not sex. I'll just say it's penetration. Uh, these scenes are very, very graphic. I would say trigger warning graphic. They were trigger warning graphic for me. This these are the books that made me realize, oh, I shouldn't. Or Dead Inside is the book that made me realize, oh, I should not read this while I'm eating dinner, because I did that, and I was like, oh, that was a mistake. Yeah, very graphic, both in sex and violence, in 2 scenes. The rest of it, but those 2 scenes, yeah, I think they. There's one scene in Clown Hunt that I think could compare for graphic uh, quantity or quality in here, but I think these 2 are probably the 2 most graphic scenes. But number 1 is Clown Hunt because except for one scene, I don't think any of the scenes get as graphic as those 2 in Dead Inside, but they get close and there's a lot more scenes. So Clown Hunt and Dead Inside are just miles ahead as far as graphic content. It's just amusing to me that the 2 most graphic books are the 2 best books of the one that I read. Now, as I said at the beginning, I kind of just picked these books, went to the extreme horror section. Dead Inside, I did pick because it was like on a top 10 list that somebody had published, and I was like, okay. But the other 4, I just kind of looked and, it's crapshoot. If I were going for like the most graphic scenes, I probably would have picked differently. But I just was looking for basically overview of the extreme horror, just random picks. This is what extreme horror is. And, I do think that I wish that I had picked some of them differently. But I'm happy that I read Dead Inside and Clown Hunt. I'm not happy that I read the other 3. I don't think there's anything that I got out of them except frustration and anger. But these two were pretty good. Am I going to read an extreme horror novel again? Never say never. Probably at some point, not anytime soon. I don't think. I already have a full slate of stuff to read, so I don't think I will be reading them this year. But you never know. But if you do read extreme horror, if you have a recommendation for a good extreme horror novel that is also a good book that gives us something more than just I am not looking for a slasher book. If I don't care about the characters, then I don't care how extreme it is. Please don't do that, Ron. So you know it. But if you have a book that's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of graphic content in here, but it also got great character work, recommend it. I may check it out next year. So that is it. That's my excursion into extreme horror. It was interesting, frustrating, uh, not as graphic as I expected. Started to make me think maybe I'm a little bit more sick than I thought I was. And I'm not saying anybody who reads this is sick. It's just, I thought I was going to be like, oh, this is too much for me. And I didn't even really get close to that, even with Clown Hunt and Dead Inside. But please like and subscribe, leave a comment.